Well, hello and welcome to Dig Deeper, episode 10, and joined here by Dr. Stephen Backhouse. It's 10 weeks on the trot, and it's great to have you with us,
Stephen.
Stephen.
10 weeks already.
Yeah.
Wow.
This is great.
Yeah. Okay.
And we're looking at what will be quite a complicated section, so we're going to get stuck in straight away if we can, and we're going to look at Mark chapter 7. And beginning at verse 1 all the way through to verse 30, and I'm going to read it from N.T. Wright's translation, Kingdom New Testament, and Stephen may well be quoting from David Bentley Hart at some point as well. But here we go. Any other translation you might have in front of you, but these are the ones we're working with. So the Pharisees gathered around Jesus, together with some legal experts from Jerusalem. They saw that some of his disciples were eating their food with unclean, that is, unwashed hands. The Pharisees, you see, and indeed all the Jews, don't eat unless they first carefully wash their hands. This is to maintain the tradition of the elders. When they come in from the market, they never eat without washing. There are many other traditions which they keep, washing of cups, pots, and bronze dishes. Anyway, the Pharisees and legal experts asked Jesus, why don't your disciples follow the tradition of the elders? Why do they eat their food with unwashed hands? Isaiah summed you up just right, Jesus replied. Hypocrites, the lot of you. What he said was this: with their lips this people honor me, but with their hearts they turn away from me. All in vain they think to worship me. All they teach is human commands. You abandon God's commands and keep human tradition. So, he went on, you have a fine way of setting aside God's commands so as to maintain your tradition. Here's an example. Moses said, honor your father and your mother, and anyone who slanders father or mother should die. But you say, if someone says to their mother or father or mother, what you might get from me, it's korban, which means given to God, you don't let them do anything else for their father or mother. The net result is that you invalidate God's word through this tradition which you hand on, and there are lots more things like that which you do. Jesus summoned the crowd. Listen to me, all of you, he said, and get this straight. What goes into you from outside cannot make you unclean. What makes you unclean is what comes out from inside. When they got back into the house away from the crowd, his disciples asked him about the parable. You didn't get it either, he asked. Don't you see that whatever goes into someone from outside can't make them unclean? It doesn't go into the heart, it only goes into the stomach and then carries on out down the drain. Result, all foods are clean. What makes someone unclean, he went on, is what comes out of them. Evil intentions come from inside, out of people's hearts. Sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, wickedness, treachery, debauchery, envy, slander, pride, stupidity. These evil things all come from inside. They are what makes someone unclean. Jesus got up, left that place, and went to the region of Tyre. And when he took up residence in a house, he didn't want anyone to know, but it wasn't possible for him to remain hidden. On the contrary, news of him at once reached a woman who had a young daughter with an unclean spirit. She came and threw herself down at his feet. She was Greek, a Syrophoenician woman by race, and she asked him to cast the demon out of her daughter. Let the children eat what they want first, Jesus replied. It's not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. Well, master, she said, even the dogs under the table eat the crumbs that the children drop. Well said, replied Jesus. Off you go. The demon has left your daughter. So she went home and found the child lying on the bed and the demon gone. Jesus went, and the demon
That's
gone.
It.
Here ends the lesson. Don't read on
God.
until next week. Great. Here we are. That's an intense passage.
Yeah.
We've gone from the feeding of the 5,000, cool story, everyone loves the feeding of the 5,000, to the Jesus walking on water, what a great story that is, and then this.
I mean, there's something, the purity stuff is world historical changing. Like that kind of teaching of Jesus, when then the sorts of actions that came after from his followers had world historical importance. So this is quite an important little chapter in the history of the human race, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, that declaring all things clean, or what comes out of you is what's impure, not what goes into you. And that is a real change in the way Christians started to relate. Jewish Christians started to relate to other people.
Okay.
And
Should we start there?
yeah, we could start there because it leads directly to the next story, the woman with the demon daughter.
And then maybe to explain what the kind of, I mean, obviously the theme of the unclean, what, you know, out and in, is actually off the back of this interaction that he has with the Pharisees.
Yeah, right.
So,
Exactly,
do you want to take those in two sections, or would you rather just go straight
yeah.
to?
So I might as well go with the way it's written, right? So it's all part of one story. So
If it ain't broke.
I mean, we have just come from the feeding story. So notice how food is really important in the Gospel of Mark. Like, what you eat is actually really important, and it's not symbolic. It's actual food that you actually eat. It's very earthy. It's very bodily. Your English translations are very genteel, but he talks about bowel movements and piss pots in this passage. So it's very earthy. Okay, like we're not talking about metaphorical food. We're talking about actual food and what actually happens to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we had the feeding, right, and then that led to people being healed, and then we get the Pharisees who are really upset. So one of the things that feeding and healing does, of course, is demonstrate Jesus's kingship or his authority, right?
Yeah.
So now they're trying to find something. One of the things they're most sort of mad at Jesus about is that he seems to be gathering people around him that are not obeying the law, or they're bringing the chosen people into disrepute.
Yeah.
Right. So he's gathering people together who are unclean.
Yeah.
And so this is one of the things the Pharisees are always getting at him about. And it's kind of like they're bringing the whole race into disrepute. Jesus' movement is causing shame on everybody, right?
It's interesting, the theme of touch in the gospel.
Yeah.
You know, we just left a scenario where they would touch the hem of his garment at the end of Mark 6.
Oh yeah.
And all who touched him were healed. And then, of course, we had that amazing story of the woman who'd been bleeding, who touched me.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And so there's this kind of theme of touch throughout.
Yeah.
And Jesus breaking the protocol, the understanding of what touch is meant for, because the Pharisees were, of course, appalled at the way in which Jesus would let people touch them, would let these dirty mob, the Oklos, gather around him. You know, actually, there's no separation yet. He was claiming to be God. He was at least a prophet. He was at least a good teacher, and yet he was being touched by the dirty people.
Yeah, right. That's really true. Yeah, it's very bodily. We need to pay attention to that. Jesus's offense was not that he taught the wrong things; it's that he touched the wrong people, or he let the wrong people touch him. We got to pay attention to that, you know.
And we have that here.
Yeah,
we have that here in 7. So they got the legal experts, different from the Pharisees. Legal experts.
I think they're all stand-ins for the same kind of people.
Because there were two kind of groups, weren't they? Sadducees as well, and Pharisees. They were the kind
of Sadducees. Their kind of religious imagination was more centered around the temple. So the Sadducees and the Herodians often came together because Herod built the temple. So the Herodians, people in the Herod account, and the Sadducees, they had it's sort of like, it's not this, but it would be kind of like we've got different types of Christians, and we have some who are cathedral Christians, and then we have some who are shopfront Pentecostal Christians, right?
Okay.
Or evangelical conservative Christians. And they're all Christian, but we know that the flavor of some is more to do with cathedrals, and the flavor of somebody else is more to do with Bible studies in their own home or something like that, right? So Sadducees are cathedral types.
Yeah.
Pharisees are synagogue types. They're Bible studies in your own home types in some ways.
Okay.
And the Pharisees, their Jewish imagination was more centered around keeping of the law as a way to stay pure. And the Sadducees, their religious imagination was more around the temple as the place you needed to do the sacrifices to be made pure. So they're all concerned with purity. It's just there's different focus.
Yeah. Okay.
And Sadducees were, well, the temple was there because Herod had built it. And the temple tax, which is what Caesar imposed on everyone, was being used to keep the temple open. So the temple itself it was compromised.
Yeah.
If you were really concerned about racial purity, which the Pharisees were, then the Sadducees were kind of flirting with the wrong side, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So
they were almost in conflict with one another as well.
They were. There was conflict between Sadducees and Pharisees.
They're both against Jesus. Yeah.
Yeah. They both hate Jesus. They hate each other, but they hate Jesus even more. And that's
nothing unites like a common enemy, right?
Yeah. So when they get together to test Jesus, that's meant to be a really significant moment.
And the legal experts here that
the
Pharisees are appealing to, would they be within that?
Well, they would be in the kind of Pharisaical camp, because they are concerned with how do we keep ourselves set apart? How do we keep ourselves pure? And again, their concern was less about inner sin and more about pollution from Gentiles and others who are in your land.
Well, it's almost like while we've been on lockdown, there are some of us who have just think, well, the spirit of the rules is that we can't get within 2 meters of one another. We shouldn't hug and kiss close relatives.
Right.
And there are some who want to know the exact rules, almost as a way of saying, well, therefore, this is what we can do over here. It's almost like gives you more permission.
Yes, right.
When you adhere to the strict rules.
Which is what Jesus accuses the Pharisees of right here. He's like, oh, you're really good at making up lots of complicated rules that make it look like you're keeping to the law, but you're not paying attention. Your heart is far away from it, right?
Right.
And this is one of the tactics that Jesus does. And Mark, well, all the Gospels like to point this out, but how Jesus, his approach is to essentially tell people what the law was there for in the first place. So he's not speaking. This is why people say, oh, he talked as if he had authority and not like one of the Pharisees. Because his approach, like if you or I were going to have a debate about the Bible, right? We'd have we'd both appeal to our different authorities, and we'd say, well, I went to Wycliffe and I went to whatever, and then when my professors told me this, and I'd say, oh, well, my professors told me this, and we'd have that kind of debate at that level, right?
Yeah.
Imagine if you and I are having a debate about the Bible, and then along comes, I don't know, I'm going to pick a name out of Sean and Josh, there she is. She comes along and she goes, oh, you two complain about the Bible? Oh, I was there when it was written. Let me tell you what it was. When it first got written, let me tell you what the meaning was.
Yeah, okay.
Right? So you can see, like, it's not a normal debate that you're making here. You're making a huge claim about yourself. And Jesus always does that. He's basically like, you guys are always arguing about what Moses said or not, but let me tell you, I was there, I knew Moses, and this is what he meant.
So as a group concerned about the rules and concerned about the use of touch, particularly clean touch, they are trying to find a way of getting Jesus into trouble. He's been gathered by this crowd. They're touching the hem of his garment. All who touched him were healed. But what offended them was not the healings again, was it? It was the fact that he was being touched. Yeah,
well, it's more than that, because when Jesus is able to be in contact with people, he's declaring them clean.
Okay, so it goes another step beyond the.
So when you declare someone clean, that's what the Pharisees in the temple were supposed to do, because they're the guardians of the hopes and fears of the Jewish race, right? Yeah. So when you get to declare someone clean, then you've now said you are acceptable within the eye of God now. You are a chosen person again.
Yeah.
And Jesus comes along and he does that. So again, it's more about the authority that Jesus is showing. And this is why they keep saying, who can forgive sins but God alone? Like, why are you doing this? This is a godly thing you're doing. And he's like, deal with it. Sit on this and rotate it. I'm going to declare you clean. And so this is the kind of it's the real fighting words he's doing here, because he's claiming something which is a lot more than just what a normal Pharisee would do.
it seemed much more combative, this chapter that we read.
Yeah.
Much more like in your face, critical of the religious authorities.
I mean, there's only 16 chapters in Mark, and we're already in 7, so we're more than halfway through.
Yeah.
We're about to be halfway through, and it ends with a traumatic and climactic death, where all the forces of the world gather to kill Jesus, who is the king, the anointed king of God, says Mark at the beginning.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's getting to, we're fighting now.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
So what's their chief complaint about the disciples?
That they're forming habits of life around Jesus and not around the Pharisees anymore. So they are, by flouting the purity laws and all that, they're showing that they don't think that following the traditions they were born into is their ultimate authority anymore.
Okay.
And they don't think that the Pharisees or the temple priests are their ultimate guardians of their identity anymore.
Yeah, so they're becoming a breakaway group. Why don't your disciples follow the tradition of the elders? So why do they eat with their food with unwashed hands?
So pay attention to that. It's not, because us evangelical modern types, we always think it's all about religion, and we think it's about like that it was a religious debate, and it's not. It's a political debate. It's like, you're not obeying the traditions of our elders anymore. You're a race traitor. Right? It's way more to do with the formation of a new group, which is being set at odds with the other group.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what all this is about.
And Jesus calls them hypocrites.
Yeah.
And quotes from Isaiah.
Yeah. So he's like, you made the word powerless by your traditions. So they're saying, look, your people are wrong because they don't obey our traditions anymore. They're not part of our ethnic heritage anymore. They're not patriotic enough. And he goes, what are you talking about? You made a mockery of God's word with your patriotism, with your ethnic allegiance, right? You're not paying attention to the heart of the law. You just turned it into this kind of way to guard who's in and who's out. And that's not what the point was.
So can you explain this bit where he says, you have a fine way of setting aside God's command so as to maintain your tradition. Here's an example. So he gives this parallel of what Moses says, honor your father and mother.
Yeah.
And anyone who slanders father and mother should die. But he says, Jesus says, you say, if someone says to their father and mother, what you might get from me, it's korban, which means given to God.
Yeah.
You don't let them do anything else for their father or mother. What does that mean? I struggled over that even as I read it.
Okay, so so the original point of the law was to make sure that your father and mother are taken care of in old age, basically, right?
Yeah.
And then, but now the Pharisees and their whole like accumulated extra legal laws and things, korban or consecrated, set apart consecrated offerings, it was the Pharisees that were getting that offering. It was something that was being set aside for them. So they had this idea that like, well, we're doing such a big job preserving the ethnic heritage and purity of the chosen people. We deserve 1/10 of every, harvest, or we deserve 5 handfuls of grain, or whatever it was. I don't know what the exact measurement was. And so Jesus comes along and goes, you guys are claiming to preserve the law, and yet Moses' law was take care of your mom and dad, and your law is give that money to us. Give us that stuff, because we're more important than your parent, right? So he's just saying, you're not.
And over spiritualizing it by saying you're giving it to God.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're not giving it to God, they're giving it to the Pharisees.
Right.
And he's putting his finger right on what's actually pissing off the Pharisees. It's that the disciples are not respecting the Pharisees. It's not even that they're not respecting being Jewish. Because Jesus comes along and says, no, if they were really, they're totally Jewish because they obey God's law. They're just not pharisaical.
Right.
That's why you're mad. You're mad because they're not obeying your laws.
Which is actually, they give that away. They give that away with their complaint at the beginning. It says, why don't your disciples follow the tradition of the elders?
Exactly.
They give it away. That actually their complaint is that they're breaking with them than they are about following. They're not. Their complaint isn't why aren't they following the law?
Exactly. But really, what they mean is, why aren't you following us?
Yeah.
And this is why you always get Jesus will say things like, I'm fulfilling the law, or
Yeah.
I was there when Moses had the law. Like he fights them not by saying the law is stupid and should be ignored. He fights them by saying, I know what the law is better than you do.
Yeah.
And but it was still quite fighting. He wasn't a good, I think that's the other thing we have to pay attention to. Jesus wasn't a good Jew. Like, he doesn't look like a good observant Jewish guy. He really doesn't. Like, he takes all the things that they uphold and then he gives them his own definition to them. So
yeah,
he really is a challenge to them. It's not like he was kind of quietly getting his head down, going to the synagogue every Saturday and doing his sacrifices and just looking like a good Jew and then getting persecuted for it. He really didn't look like a good Jew according to the image of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he really was offering an alternative to the normal ways of thinking of yourself as a chosen person. Yeah.
And then he goes on to say that actually purity is much more defined by what's within us.
Yeah. So now he's making this is that kind of turn to this is one of these things where it's world historical in terms of imagination is changing. Yeah. Because, I mean, 2,000 years later, we now have a problem, don't we, of individualism, like too much individual focus,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But it has its seeds here, where we're starting to get this idea that your authenticity, your identity, your rightness before the eye of God, you have personal responsibility for that. It's not just what group you were born into. Your rightness before God isn't based on how well you quietly continue to obey the rights and traditions of your inherited race.
Yeah.
Right? You have to own it for yourself now, or you have to take responsibility for yourself. So it's the beginning of that, what we might call the turn to the individual.
Yeah, okay.
It's really important. I mean, we need it, right? Individualism, fine, that's bad, but individuals are important.
Well, it's what you said last week. It's personal, but not private.
Exactly. I mean, you'll notice, exactly, this is personal, but not private. I mean, you'll notice even here, all the things that go into you, all the things that come out of you are defiling you. Evil thoughts, whoring, theft, murder, adultery, greed, all those things are acted on other people, right? There's just because we say sin is now personal, that doesn't mean we're saying it's private. Right? Like, there is no such thing as a victimless sin. Mm-hmm. Every sin will affect another person. Even if you think it's a private one, even if you're privately proud, if you privately despise everybody, that's going to affect the way you relate to them, whether you mean to or not, right?
Yeah.
For example. So, like, there's no such thing as a private sin.
And it goes back to this idea that Jesus is reminding us that we have an individual responsibility to follow him. You know, he calls individuals to follow him, but we are joining a movement of people. So we're called as an individual, but we are part of something. We don't remain as an individual. Our impact is no longer individual.
And when you're called to, like, so when Jesus says, repent, for the kingdom of God is at hand, to hear him say that is to hear him say, change the habits of life that you have been following and come and adopt my habits of life.
Yeah.
So the Pharisees totally get that. They understand. They're saying, look at your disciples. They have repented of the habits of life that we taught them, and now they're learning the habits of life that you're teaching them.
Yeah.
This is bad.
Yeah.
Right? But it was individuals being called out of those lives and brought into another group. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
It's interesting. We don't, particularly in the modern church, we don't like to talk about Jesus' difficult words to us personally, but, these are deeply challenging to the way we live our lives.
Oh, yeah.
We may not murder anyone.
Some of those sins just today, right? Like, I can't with all honesty say that I've been completely free from evil thoughts or greed or anger or whatever today, right? Arrogance, recklessness.
Stupidity. I like that one.
I love that. So Tom Wright said stupidity, did he?
Yeah.
That's brilliant. I love that
What
one.
did David Bentley Hart say? It's the last one in the list.
Yeah, recklessness.
Okay.
But this idea of headlong, just rushing into disaster without any thought.
I love that. When do you ever hear a sermon preached about like the sin of stupidity?
Don't you wish we could hear some more?
Yeah, well, exactly. That's a daily occurrence for me, that one.
See, so all these things are constantly fresh. This is part of why it's good to be reminded as being an individual. This is where my friend Soren Kierkegaard would pop up and just say, these are things that you have to be reminded of all the time. Every moment you're always being confronted with that.
Yeah.
And if you think your identity is primarily bound up in your group that you were born into, then you get to say things like, well, I'm okay because my group somebody else somewhere along the line made the decision for me, so I'm fine. And you don't take moral responsibility for your own greed and arrogance and pride and theft and murder and lust or whatever, because you think, well, I'm fine because my skin is white and I speak English, or was baptized as a baby into an evangelical church or whatever. And you have this idea that like the group I'm with is doing the job, the heavy lifting for me.
Yeah. I bought my ticket. I'm on the bus. Someone else is driving.
Somebody else is driving. And then Jesus is like, no, what's going to hurt you isn't coming from outside. It's not going to come from another group. It's not going to come from illegal immigrants or people who vote for the blue team or people who vote for the red team. It's going to come from you. So be on guard. And actually some of the language he uses, there's some phrases that he uses even here, which is when he says, be aware or take note. Trying to find the exact verse where that shows up. Verse 16.
Yeah.
If anyone has ears to listen, let him listen.
Yeah.
Or sometimes he says, take heart, take note. So there's this, it's a repetitive phrase that Jesus uses in the Gospel of Mark, which is always, the word is, I forget the exact Greek, it's like blepe or something, but it's the idea is like, hark, or take, warning. It's kind of, yeah.
It's interesting what you said there about what hurts you is not that which comes from the outside. Also, what protects you is not going to be from the outside. So
that's a good point.
You're just because, or it's just, I'm just riffing off what you said earlier, that idea that, just if you're born into the right religious grouping or Pharisaical traditions, that doesn't protect you from actually the evil that Jesus would say that is within you. And I think the same is true for us. The danger of anything that becomes institutionalized or so routine that we forget that.
Yeah.
That we think if we attend church, I'm somehow made clean again. Or if I log on to Dig Deeper, I'm made clean again. Or if I give money to the church and I'm a committed member because I serve coffee at the back whenever we can meet again and serve coffee at the back. That's enough. And I think all those things, it's not because we deliberately think, oh, I'm going to try and tick all the right boxes to make myself clean, but they almost act as if they are a smoke screen.
Yeah, like a substitute for it.
Yeah, that we think, oh, I've done all these things. I'm in the right club. I'm right with Jesus, therefore. But what Jesus says is, no, there's no amount of protection of the club or hurt from the club that you need to deal with. It's actually everything is from within you.
Now you're making me think what that might be in my life, because I'm sure I have something. Because I don't think going to church makes me that's not my worry. I'll probably happily never go to church again, to be honest. That's probably not actually true. I probably will go to church one day, but right now I'm not thinking I'm unclean because I'm not in church. But I wonder whether I'm trying to think what it might be for me, because I know I've got religious practices that I'm hoping will do the heavy lifting for me. Yeah,
I think service. I mean, when you're in the church world like you and I.
Service, yeah, that's it, right? I think it's like, oh, I'm okay with God because I had a nice chat with Jon tonight.
Yeah.
So like the kind of stuff I'm doing with you now could be my substitute for actually hearing the voice of the Lord for myself.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, oh, I had a good time. We said a few clever, funny things about the gospel, and then I had fun, so I'm okay. That might be it. Yeah, that might be it.
And it is a smokescreen to actually, then we do ask yourself, well, hang on,
Yeah.
I was really stupid today. And I was almost intentionally so. And Jesus would kind of call that evil.
Yeah, right.
I maybe need to deal with that.
Yeah.
But instead I've got this smokescreen of church or smokescreen of chat with Steve or whatever.
I think that's probably it. Yeah. Yeah. And I know, I don't know how to do it because I'm so like, I don't know about you, but like I grew up, I'm kind of allergic now to the idea of like a quiet time or a set time. Like, because I grew up so much with this idea that if you have to read your Bible a certain amount of time every day, or you have to do that, and then there's all this whole industry, like literally an industry built around quiet times where you buy Bibles with big margins and to write your own notes. So you buy, a devotional series or something.
Yeah.
So there's people earning a living off of the idea of a quiet time. So I'm kind of allergic to that. But to be honest, I don't have a replacement.
Well, and I've been, like I said, I've been reading this book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, which a few of our guys.
Wow. Yeah, right.
And John Mark Comer says the same thing. He says, if I mention quiet time, some of you will reel back as a kind of, oh my gosh, yes, and he just gives a big thumbs up to saying, actually, we need time alone with the Lord.
Yeah, right.
Call it what you like. I agree with you. I think some of the language brings back echoes of unhelpful kind of burdens sometimes.
Type stuff. Yeah.
But the principle is still good.
I did have a guy. It was actually at Wycliffe. It was the time when you and I were both there at the same time, and I've forgotten his name, but I know you'd know him. He was like a pastoral supervisor. He was one of the staff.
Was it Jeff Morn?
No, but I do know Jeff, and he is a kind man. But it wasn't Jeff. But anyway, it was this other guy, and I did tell him a bit about this. I was like, sometimes just like I teach the Bible for a living, or I'm studying the Bible. It's very hard to read the Bible, in the mornings as well as part of my quiet time. And he said, well, why don't you have just an actual quiet time? Just make a cup of coffee and just sit quietly, but do it with Jesus.
Yeah.
And I was like,
yeah,
that's a good idea. And that was really good advice.
That's what I've rediscovered recently.
Yeah. Just do it, but do it with Jesus. And I'm like, all right, I can do that.
Yeah.
Because unlike a lot of people, I have hours of Bible in my life every day. So for me, when I have a quiet time, I find it very hard to read the Bible as part of my prayer time, because I'm always thinking, oh, that'll be good. I'll use that when I talk to John later tonight.
Yeah, that'll preach.
It's like literally my job to read the Bible.
Yeah.
So that means during my quiet time, I damn well better not read the Bible. Do you know what I mean?
Time with Jesus. Yeah, yeah.
But my danger is that I don't have any quiet time at all. I just go straight into busyness.
Yeah.
And that's...
You need to read this book, dude.
Yeah, I should actually.
It's good.
Allergic to Americans talking about theology, so I got to get over that.
Yeah, you do. You need to get over that.
He's good. He's a good guy, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's not one of those. Yeah.
This is a very Stephen and John conversation. I don't think anyone else is they may have gone to make a coffee, or this is just like me and you talking through the angst of our personal relationship with Jesus while doing it for a living.
Yeah, but I bet a lot of people listening to this, not a lot of people, but it's not unlikely that there's a lot of people who grew up born again who are listening to this.
Yeah, yeah.
And who grew up inhabiting or inheriting forms of life of what it means to be a Christian. And now we are at the stage where we're going, well, I like Jesus, but I'm not sure if I like all these forms of life that I was taught to adopt. I don't know the value of them.
But this is what it takes us back then to the very beginning.
Yeah.
Which is the inherited traditions of our elders. And actually, Jesus is saying you are fixated about those traditions as if they are the end in of themselves.
Exactly.
But John Mark Comer in this book, and we would say, actually, they're not the end of themselves. Actually, they're all about getting right with Jesus.
Getting into that place where you can hear his voice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to the Syrophoenician woman.
Yeah, she's good. One of my favorite. I've got a couple of favorite stories in Mark. This is one of them because I like the hard ones. So the story here, like I don't know. Have you ever heard anybody try and explain this away, or have you ever heard, what are the kinds of strategies you've heard to deal with this
Do
story?
you know what? This is one of those passages that I think I've rarely heard. I don't think I personally have ever preached on it.
No, they ignore it.
Yeah, I probably did. I probably skipped over it, or like, oh, this is a good time just to do a one-off sermon.
Yeah, because Jesus calls a woman a dog, right?
Where exactly is it? So you might have a different translation. So we've got here, even the dogs under the table eat the crumbs that the children drop.
So verse 27. So she's a so what she is, let's just run through the story very quickly. So she's a Greek foreign woman, and her daughter has a demon.
Okay.
So, like, do you remember before I've talked about the woman who'd been bleeding for 12 years, who was really poor? And when you meet her, she's probably one of the least human people you've met in the Gospel of Mark.
Yeah.
This woman is another one. So so from a Jewish point of view, from a Pharisee point of view, because remember, we've just been talking about Pharisees and purity.
Mm-hmm.
That's about who's close to being a chosen person and who's not. So now the very next story is someone who's about as far away from being a chosen person as you can imagine. So she's a woman, she's foreign, and she has a demon-possessed daughter. So she just is striking out in every box, basically.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So she comes along, and so remember that the Pharisee story is actually about your allegiance to a race. That's what the purity is all about, okay? And now comes somebody who's of a different race, and she says, Jesus, I want you to cast the demon out of my daughter. And Jesus says, verse 27, first let the children be fully fed, for it is not a good thing to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. So he's basically looking at her going, why should I help you? It's not good to give good stuff to dogs. And what he's doing here is he's actually using a phrase that's very well known. Rabbis and Pharisees called Gentile people dogs. They did. That was a well-known phrase. And so Jesus is adopting a racist phrase.
We see that in modern day when there's ever any ethnic divisions.
Uh-huh.
There is the dehumanizing of other races.
Exactly.
By using animals as a reference point. So in Rwanda, it was cockroaches.
Cockroaches, I know. Yeah. And here it was dogs, because a synonym for chosen person was the true human.
Okay, yeah.
Anybody who wasn't a chosen person was a less than human, right? So the nickname was dogs. So Jesus is using a phrase that is expected of somebody like him to use against somebody like her. We have to know that. So do you remember I talked before about contested areas? I don't know if you remember. In the Gospel of Mark, one of the things is that Jesus is going to different spheres of influence, and then he'll cast out a demon, or he'll do something that breaks. He's binding up the strong man of that particular sphere, and he's releasing the captives, right? And sometimes it's hunger and food, sometimes it's nature miracles, sometimes it's the synagogue, sometimes it's the temple, whatever.
And he's displaying his kingliness over
that sphere.
Yeah.
And now he's displays his kingliness over purity laws, and now he's going to show his kingliness over racism. He signals this phrase. He uses a well-known phrase, and I've talked about this before, and I'm not going to use any well-known racial insults. Just everyone at calm. But we all know what some of those words.
We all know what they might be.
And I'm not going to use them. But imagine if I was like a politician, right? And I came along and it was election, and I said, I believe in British jobs for British workers, right? You'd all know that that's kind of a code for jobs for white people, right? Sort of a dog whistle word. Yeah. And here Jesus is using that kind of phrase, although it's even more obvious because he's actually calling somebody a dog. But it's like that. So imagine the woman comes to Jesus and says, can you heal my daughter? And he looks at her and he goes, yeah, but don't you know British jobs for British workers? So he So people are, he's setting up a narrative. They know how it's supposed to play out.
Yeah.
And then what does she do? Verse 28. What does she do?
She responds.
But she answered, yeah. And she
Keep your
fights
dogs
back.
under the table, eat the crumbs that the children drop.
All right. So he uses a well-known phrase against her. She fights back. She doesn't take it. And she doesn't slink away. And then what does he say to her?
Well said.
Well said. Another way you could say is on account of your intelligence. Well said, on account of your intelligence, the demon has left your daughter. What do you think is unique about that verse in all the Gospels?
What does it say in your version? On account of intelligence, is that what your version says?
On account of your good answer, yeah.
Oh, see, I don't have that. It just says well said.
Well said, yeah, but it's the same phrase. It's kind of like, well said, good answer.
Yeah, okay.
Good answer, your daughter has been healed. What do you think is unique about that?
The woman, the daughter's been healed on the words of the woman.
Yeah, because what does he normally say? What does Jesus normally say when somebody gets
Well,
healed?
it's your faith has made you healed.
Yeah, right. This is the only person in the Gospels who gets commended for her intelligence, not her faith. Jesus has lost an argument to a less than human woman. He's publicly taken on some shame right now. This is Jesus bringing racism to the public, to the sphere, and he's allowing her to beat him in an argument. He's now taking on less honor. He's publicly humiliating himself and elevating her. And it's a direct comment on the Pharisees and their purity laws and things.
And with him being taken down, so does the validity of racism. I presume.
Yeah.
That it goes down with him. That it's not just him that gets humiliated, but even the idea that there are lesser than people.
Yeah. So he's not learning a lesson here about, sometimes you hear like sort of progressive Christians on the more liberal side. I've heard sermons or seen people talk about this, and they're like, at this moment, Jesus learned the lesson not to be a racist. He was racist, but he learned from this woman not to be a racist. And you often see that as an interpretation.
Okay.
But the problem with that is Jesus says he's not learning not to be a racist here. We've seen him touching and healing and eating with foreigners all over the place. Like by the time we get to this woman, like Jesus has proved himself not to be a racist.
Right, okay. This is a lesson he needed to learn.
The fun thing about this story is that he's publicly showing humility or humiliation, actually. He's taking on humiliation and he's elevating this woman. So he's not learning any lesson here. He's teaching the Pharisees. He's teaching everybody who's watching him. He's saying to everybody, watch this. I'm going to show you what I think about your laws about chosen people and less than humans. I'm going to let a less than human person beat me in a public argument. And by the way, I'm the clever teacher that you're all amazed at my authority. So watch this. I'm going to say, I've never called any of you clever. You're all stupid idiots. I've just called you stupid. I've said that stupidity is your sin, right? Now watch what I'm going to do to this woman who's not even a human being and she has a demon-possessed daughter. She's cleverer than any of you.
Wow.
Right? So this is the kind of story that Jesus is telling.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
so
cool.
There you go. And he seems to really like people's daughters, right? He's always healing these little girls.
Yeah.
It's quite fun. He's got a real sense of, because I guess they would be also some of the least, like the daughter of a Syrophoenician woman living in a Jewish dominated village is not going to not be somebody with great prospects.
And I presume in a Jewish community, it was always the boys that would be invested in, elevated.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So Jesus's care for women is very important here.
Yeah.
Yeah. When he elevates women or when he gives them names or brings them into his family. Like that's a political act he's making as well. Yeah.
Amazing. So as we come to a close this evening, as we wrap up these two stories, what does that leave us with? I mean, we talked and reflected, the two of us, on the smoke screen of the things in our lives, the traditions of our elders that we caught up in, that we might actually be a smoke screen to the things that actually do matter, that what is inside, you know.
Yeah.
To reflect on our stupidity or our pride or our envy or whatever. And then we move into this space around race.
Well, yeah, and it just, to me, it just shows that, like, you don't have to try very hard to make Mark relevant to us today. Like, it's fine, it's 2,000 years ago and it's a different culture, but frankly, what Christian with half a brain today doesn't notice that racial antagonism is a thing?
Yeah.
And that groups are more fiercely, especially white Christians, seem more fiercely concerned about protecting what they think is rightfully theirs than they do about letting other groups elevate themselves. Or even, like, Christians seem more worried about being humiliated than they do about humiliating others.
Yeah.
And Jesus is the exact opposite, right? Who can tell me that's not relevant today? Or what Christian with half a brain or half a heart doesn't think about their relationship to the traditions they've inherited right now?
Yeah.
And they look at Christianity and all that it is, in all of its weirdness and wildness and awfulness and goodness, and they look at it and they go, is it really my job to keep Christianity going?
Yeah.
Like, am I supposed to be defending every god awful thing that Christians say and do?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's super relevant to us today.
Yeah, it is.
I think that the inheritance of our elders is the beginning and it was the last word in our identity.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's almost like Jesus would say to us, what goes into you from outside can't make you clean as well as unclean.
Yeah, right.
What makes you unclean or clean is what's inside.
Well, it also has that idea, which I like, we've talked about it before, but this idea of, I really recommend you guys read Richard Beck, B-E-C-K. He wrote a book called, I think it's called Unclean.
Okay.
Check it. You can Google it if you've got the chance. I'm looking in my shelves. I don't actually have it in front of me right now, but really good book about purity in today's age. So Richard Beck talks about purity and this idea that we are worried about contamination and things like this. And one of the things that Jesus does, and the imagination that gets switched, right? There's a flick that gets switched in our brains where rather than think of us being contaminated by the world or the spheres that we're in or the people we come in touch with, we can think about us purifying those things. So it's Jesus is saying, it's like he's saying, it's not you going into a brothel or a bar or name whatever conservative Christian thinks is a place you shouldn't go to. That's not going to make you unclean. Having contact with sinners isn't what makes you unclean. You could make them clean. You could bring purity. The light could shine in the darkness. So there's this idea that it's changing the fundamental identity or self-awareness of what a person is thinking they're doing when they're in a presence of sin. And it could be that sin doesn't affect us, we affect it.
Yeah.
Part of the change of mindset that comes from this passage.
Yeah. It's great. It's
being
great.
a light bringer, right? But a lot of Christians today are living as if it's very fragile. They feel like any little thing, if I can't possibly read an Instagram account that I don't agree with, or I can't possibly,
Right.
The cancel culture works for Christians just the same as everybody else.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they can't possibly live with somebody whose points of view they don't like very much.
Yeah.
Because they're worried they're going to get contaminated.
Oh yeah.
And it's an utter fear-based form of religion, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. This comment said,
How awesome would it be to hear Jesus say to you, good answer?
I know, right? Like, how awesome is that? Like, this is the guy that everybody is amazed. Thousands of people are swarming over the hillsides just to hear this guy talk. And then he turns around and looks at you and goes, wow, I've never heard anybody say something that clever.
Yeah. That's great. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for your word. We thank you for the revelation, new revelations that you are bringing to us as we read it. We thank you that you were someone that brought down the powers of racial segregation, Lord, where others had been deemed unclean simply for their race. Lord, you brought that down, and we're so thankful that you set us an example in that. But Lord, help us to look at the inside of where there may be places within us that are unclean, places where we have not submitted our lives to you. And help us not be blinded by the smokescreen of our traditions and the things that kind of make us feel good, but may not address the things of the heart. We commit ourselves to you this evening. In your name, amen. Amen. We're going to wrap things up there for today, but just one thing before we go. Stephen, we are paying for these sessions, but I have to admit, we're not paying a huge amount. And I would love our audience, those who are tuning in, if you feel led to give Stephen a gift. He's not asked me to say this in any way at all. In fact, he's probably going to chastise me for saying it afterwards. If he lives by faith, this is his living. If you feel like you want to give him a gift as a thank you as we end the term together, then do ping me an email. You know where to find me, guys, and I'll make sure that gets to him. We're going to end there for episode 10. Come back for next week, our final episode of term, as we look at Mark's. Actually, no, we got 2 more left. Sorry, I'm wrong. I think we got 2 more left. So gives you more time to think about the gift. But we're going to end things there and have a wonderful rest of the week. Thanks, Stephen, for joining us.
That was fun. I'm looking forward to my quiet time tomorrow now.
Oh yeah, do. See you later.
Bye, John. Bye, everyone.
Bye.